that came in to deal with that wildfire. It's a scary time for a community. Sorry, I just moved that. There we go. It's a scary time for a community, and we felt like we were in good hands, and so we thank them for that. And then, of course, once the burn scar was in place, we were all very nervous as to what might happen if there were a weather event that took place, which is, of course, what did happen. And so what we wanted to do today, and again, appreciate your attendance, is to bring together the experts who can tell you exactly what happened and why. And so I'm not going to take too much time away from what they're going to offer. So the lineup of speakers, we'll first hear from Mayor Michelle Kafusi, and then we'll hear from Gordon Haight, who is our Public Works Director. Then we'll be pleased to hear from Shane E. Logan with the U.S. Forest Service. And last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Tim Thompson, who is with Geostrata Professional Geoscientist. So we'll start the media conference now. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mayor Michelle Kafusi, and I too just want to express gratitude for taking the time to come down so that we can be face-to-face and answer questions and talk and get facts and information out to you. I want to just start with thanking all the people, Nicole thanked as well. Our employees are amazing. We have a concept in Provo. We call it the One Provo. And what that stands for is all 11 departments that are under Provo City government come together. We come out of our silos, we work together. Who cares? If you know how to push a broom, you come out and you push the brooms. We have this amazing momentum in the city of Provo right now with the idea of One Provo, and it was really, really on full display dealing with this mudslide. So I just want to thank everyone. It was just almost magical to watch, even though it was a disaster, to see Public Works, Fire, Police, my office. We were all in it, and we were in it till we didn't have to be in it anymore. So thank you for everyone. And now I just want to point out the citizens. This is us. Here we are. The morning of, the sun's up at this point. This started, as you know, when it was still dark, and we were on it in the dark. But as the sun came up, more and more citizens started participating and coming with their shovels and asking, where do we help? How do we help? It was just, again, a One Provo, because when I say One Provo, it's not just only us. It includes the Provo School District, the citizens, all the folks. And this is a perfect example of what One Provo stands for on the more general. So I want to thank all of the citizens and everyone that grabbed the shovel. We literally got to the point where we just kind of said, all right, there's so many people helping today that now it's getting a little dangerous, because now the machines need to get in and do their thing. And it's hard to go over and tell volunteers, thanks, but please go home. That's the best thing you can do right now is go home and let us do our jobs. It was just really a wonderful sight to see. So I just wanted to point out those two things and let you know, here's our city personnel, again, amazing. So I can't even really look at it because it makes me feel emotional, because I know how hard these people work. They were up all night, we were all up all night, and just kept going. So, but again, that's what we do. We come together and we work hard and get the job done. We'll follow the agenda that Nicole mentioned, and at the end, I will take questions. And so get them in your minds and hit us with your questions, and we have the right professionals in the room to help answer them, and I will be ready to answer as well. So at this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to my Public Works Director, Gordon Haight.
Thanks, Mayor. It was really fun to see the mayor out there with her whole staff working that morning. It was very impressive. So when we have an event like this, one of the things that's really important to us is to analyze what took place, what did we do, and how do we address this in the future. And so right now we're in the process of having an after-action report We've hired Geostrata. They're going to be working on this for the next several weeks to get this to us. But we have had some preliminary information that I think is important to get out to our residents and to the public, and not delay that long to get the full report. What's really been critical, again, you'll hear from the Forest Service, from Shane, is that their ability to gather data and get this information to us quick and early has been fantastic. It's just been incredible, other than they also fight fires, but they do a great job with that as well. So I just want to describe just briefly what happened. We're familiar with the fire that took place. 10 days after the fire, we had a very substantial rain event, and we'll let the professionals talk a little bit about the details of that event. But it came down and it landed directly on the burn scar and brought down a lot of mud. And you can see from the pictures the amount of flow, the potential damage that it could do, and they'll give some description of that. Let's go to the next slide. And so the biggest damage, of course, was the church. There was some property that mud came up on, both residential and commercial, further downstream. It went clear into State Street. UDOT was responsible and came in and responded well by getting their road cleaned up. But it's critical for us. We take a lot of pride in making sure we protect our residents. The homes are number one, or the residents, their safety is number one. The homes, private property, the public property, the churches, the businesses are just as critical. So that's why we're doing this after action report. I'd like to just give Shane Winters a minute. He's going to talk about the effort the city's crews put in for that first 30 hours. And then we'll turn it over to Shane with the Forest Service.
Shane Winters, I'm with Public Works. I'm the Public Services Director. I think want to make sure that what doesn't get lost in all this is the city's ability to handle these kind of natural disasters. There's a lot of work that goes in the background with a lot of different departments throughout the city. They're well trained and they know how to do their job as well. So as the mayor said, we want to recognize these efforts. A lot of these guys put in 24 hours or more of their time just in the initial disaster, making sure that residents and utilities and roadways were opened back up and available to the public. So here's some quick numbers that were put together. We were able to get the cleanup of the disaster completed over 2.5 days. Total number of hours, there were actually, where we had city crews working on there, were about 31 total hours of the 2.5 days. So we were able to get through this cleanup fairly quickly. So I want to recognize again those that were involved, from our first responders, our police and fire, our public works department, our parks department, our energy department, who were there immediately as the debris flow was coming down. They were able to secure the site and immediately start the cleanup efforts. We had, again, just some numbers here of how much material we were able to move, total hours, man hours. This is just some of the numbers that we had come up with of the effort was there. There's a lot more, again, from volunteers, from the community that were able to do this. Again, want just the public to recognize we have experience and we have the ability with the professionals that we have in the cities to deal with these things and deal with them very quickly. We were able to get the roads open fairly quickly, actually within 24 hours. Slate Canyon, one of the major roads in the area, to help make sure that we could get traffic and emergency services flowing through the area. So again, I want to appreciate those that were involved in the cleanup, from all of our city crews and also all the volunteers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shani Logan. I'm the Bear Team Coordinator for the Uinta Wasatch Cache National Forest. And I should preface that BEAR stands for Burned Area Emergency Response. And I'm here to talk about some of the maps that were produced during our bear assessment of the Buckley Draw Fire. And one of those maps is the soil burn severity map. Essentially, soil burn severity is the extent that soil is impacted by fire, and that's dependent upon the heat duration, heat intensity, and also the fuel type that's burned. And some of the indicators that change with the level of burn severity, as in low, moderate, or high, is essentially the level of ground cover on the surface, the soil structure, the strength of the soil, roots, if they've been consumed or not, and fire-induced water repellency, and the ash color in depth. And soil burn severity is the best primary indicator for watershed responses in post-fire conditions, because it correlates to where the greatest areas of flooding might occur on the specific soil, and also it's reduced ability to infiltrate, and also the areas where it's likely to erode the most. So essentially, the higher burn severity, the likely greater the post-fire watershed responses. And for this assessment, we use essentially a pre and post-fire satellite imagery of the burn scar, and then we go out and validate by collecting points. And once we collect them, we edit that pre-image and finally create that soil burn severity. For the Buckley Draw Fire soil burn severity map, it came out to 6% high, 32% moderate, 45% low, and then 16% very low or unburned. And that is within the typical range for high burn severity. A typical fire is 2 to 12% high soil burn severity. So once we got the soil burn severity data, we send that off to the USGS, where they run their post-fire debris flow hazard assessment model. And there's the watershed characteristics go into that model along with rain intensities, as well as soil properties. And those are really to answer the points of where in the watershed a debris flow would likely occur, and what rainfall intensities would cause a debris flow, and also what is the estimated volume of a debris flow if it did occur. So with the debris flow model, we chose a 2-year storm with a peak 15-minute rainfall intensity rate of 32 millimeters per hour. And I want to pause. So we chose a certain design storm, but I will talk about the specific storm that happened on August 27th, 28th at the end of this. So those will be different, and I'll get to that in a minute. But essentially, for Bear, we choose a slightly elevated storm event that has a high likelihood to occur during the recovery window. And for this area, regarding the vegetation type, it's 3 to up to more 5 years. So a 2-year storm event any given year has a 50% chance of occurring. Over 3 years, it has an 88% chance of occurring, and over 5 years, it has a 97% chance of occurring at any time during that period. So one of the outputs from the debris flow model is the debris flow likelihood, and it produces 2 different types of information: the segments and the basins. Essentially, those are calculated on different geospatial scales, where, let's say, a basin has an overall probability of a debris flow happening, but within that basin, there's areas where the debris flows would more likely occur than other areas within that area. So the modeled basin for the Buckley Draw Fire had a 60 to 80% chance of a debris flow occurring with a 2-year storm. And it's important to point out, these are just models that, these just help us interpret what may happen. These are not actualities or eventualities. And regarding the segments where the debris flows might specifically occur within the basin that is modeled, within the fire, they're primarily 80 to 100% chance of occurring for a 2-year storm event. And another output is the debris flow volume, where it's just another estimate of regarding how much material may come down if a debris flow occurred for a 2-year event. So overall, for the modeled outlet of the burn scar, it was estimated for a 2-year event that roughly 10,000 to 100,000 cubic meters of material may come down the slope. And so the debris flow combined hazard is as well another output of the model, and it's just another way of looking at it. It's essentially combining the likelihood and volume, where a high likelihood debris flow with a high volume would be a high combined hazard rating. And the inverse of that is a low likelihood debris flow with a low volume would be a low combined hazard. So essentially, the whole basin and all the segments within there had a high combined hazard rating for a debris flow. And so this fourth output of the for the debris flow model is for rainfall thresholds. Essentially, within the first year during the recovery, the from dark green to red, there's a decreasing amount of rain that would be needed for a 75% chance of debris flow. So the red and yellow areas would be less rain needed rather compared to the green areas. And so if the overall basin is estimated that a rain event of 32 to 36 millimeters per hour, which is roughly 1.25 inches to 1.4 inches per hour, would cause a debris flow in the overall arching basin to reach that outlet below. And most of the individual segments within the debris flow had a rainfall threshold of 24 to 28 millimeters per hour, which is roughly 1 inch per hour. And so the August 27th to the August 28th rain event, with my conversations with the National Weather Service, that weather event dropped 0.7 to 0.8 inches of rain in 30 minutes, which is roughly equivalent to a 10-year event. And so, which comes out to roughly 2 inches of rain per hour, which is, for metric purposes, is 51 millimeters per hour. And so essentially the modeled events that we did is a smaller, less event than what actually happened. And so a 10-year storm event has a roughly 10% chance of happening any given year. And then over 3 years, 27% chance, and over 5 years, roughly 42% chance. And when so it was a 10-year event. When it did rain and hit the ground within the post-fire burn scar, it acted as a 25-year event because of the post-fire conditions, not allowing for the water to be quickly infiltrated. It's rather ran off the surface and carried material down with it. And with that, I'll hand it off to Tim.
I'm Tim Thompson. I'm a principal geologist with Geostrata. I have Danny Brown here with me, who's a principal geotechnical engineer with our company. And the two of us are, for our company, the ones that assess debris flow hazards when we're providing those services. We've been working on the Buckley Draw debris flow hazard assessment for the last few years with the city so that they could get a feel for what mitigation measures could be designed to help reduce those hazards and the impacts of those hazards in the future. As Shane was saying, all along the Wasatch Front, we have drainage basins. Those drainage basins are a natural collector for rainwater. The reason they're there is because water eventually comes in large enough volumes that there's erosion and materials removed, and that's how canyons form. So these type of events can happen with or without fires, where most of the time it's water flow. Occasionally there could be a large enough amount of water that you could get some debris coming out even if there is no fire. But post-fire conditions trigger a much higher likelihood that debris flows can come out. So where Shane and his group, we use their resources quite a bit when we're doing our work. When we went up to the site to have a site visit with the city staff post debris flow, we also had a member of the Utah Geological Survey's hazards group that was with us as well. They're an awesome resource for us when we're consulting and working on these types of assessments. We rely heavily on the information we get from the Forestry Service, from some of the natural hazards that are provided, those resources online from the federal government, and also the state hazards group. So when we're looking at these basins, we use what's called the Western States Regressive Model Analysis. It was published in 2010, and it's a database of all the debris flows that they could find in the western United States, and they came up with an analysis method to determine the likelihood of debris flows and how big of an event could come out. We looked at the Buckley Draw, and you could see the fire here. that occurred in 2003, and they built this channel because of the fire, and then eventually they had a subsequent, about a year later, they had a debris flow that came down. You can see that in comparison with the 2025 event, and so when we're looking at these fires and the post-fire conditions, what we're looking for when it comes to mitigation design is typically two key points. One, you can imagine it's a very large basin, water's hitting the entire basin all over, debris may be mobilizing, but that water is falling in all the different parts of the canyon, and depending on where the water falls, it takes a certain amount of time for that water to reach the mouth of the canyon. And that's not the same for each drop of water, because some of them are dropping right near the mouth and some of them are dropping at the very top. So with a flow event, typically what happens is you start to get a flow event that builds up over time. You wind up with a peak flow event, the maximum velocity that's coming out during this flood. That peak lasts a certain amount of time, and then you get a diminishing volume that will continue to occur until eventually everything that's going to drain out of the canyon drains out. So when we take a look at these graphs, or these photos, you can see the edge of the berm that was built for mitigation up here. You can also see it here and here. These are the tops of the drainage channel. This is the berm that was turning the drainage that would flow to the north. And then this is the channel that would convey that flow. And you can see this is the peak flow events can be told by when you look at the levees that are formed at the margins of that drainage. You can see how high the mud and the water came. And you can see in 2003, it basically came down just the bottom of the channel. Somebody had constructed a check dam with large rocks in that channel. And this is a small enough event that even these boulders were able to stop some of the mud, allow the water to flow through. But if you take that in comparison to what happened recently, this same high bank, which is up here, the flow basically reached almost to the top of the drainage channel. So that was, the peak volumes are not comparable. The peak flows in this event were considerably larger than what happened in 2003. You go to the next one. So in 2003, when we take a look at some of the data that we're analyzing right now to try to give the city some advice on what to do moving forward, you can see that this is the end of that berm, or that channel we were just looking at. And here's the debris flow that came down. They had some fencing, and the debris flow hit the fence. It's a 4-foot high metal fence, and then it's got about 2 feet of fabric that comes up in order to try to catch some of the silt and things that might come out. And you can see that this kind of caught the flow, and then the flow actually moved to the end of the fencing, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you can see that there wasn't a lot of impact to a lot of, this was the first fence, then the flow came down to a second fence, and by the time it hit the third fence, there was no impact on that fence. In comparison, this is the debris that came out of this area, rather than having a really small area that's mostly looks like it's a dirty fluid flow by this point with some mud and some rocks. This was a much larger amount of sediment and water that came out. If we go to the next one. And then this is the distal end of the flow. You can see, so there's 3 series of fences. We'll show a diagram later in the bottom part of this field. And there were 3 series of fences in the upper part of this field. And this is the location where the church would eventually be built. And you can see that by the 3rd fence, this debris flow is basically stopping. But as you can see here, the extremely increased volume of sediment allowed this flow to continue all the way to Nevada and to the State Center as well. So the extent of those debris flows, which we'll talk about a little bit more, was much different, the 2 events. So if we go to the next slide. So we wanted to take a look at where the debris went in this flow. And all of that fencing that was there in 2003 has been removed by the grading and construction that's going on on this property right now. So one of the questions that was asked was, with this debris flow and the fencing gone, would the fencing have been a benefit? Would that have been able to mitigate this flow? And what happened now, and what should we be thinking about in the future? So one of the things, when you took a look at those pictures, we went and estimated the first debris flow probably had, and we estimate peak flow volumes when we're looking at channel flow and trying to design a channel. We need to design it for peak flows. When we look at catchment areas that collect and store that sediment, we look at total volumes. So we measure peak flow in cubic feet per second, and we measure the volumes that need to be stored in acre feet. And an acre feet basically is, if you imagine an acre covered with 1 foot of sediment, that's an acre foot of sediment. In the 2003 fire, we estimate maybe a half an acre feet or slightly less than that came out of the canyon. I would be shocked if it was anything more than that based on what we were able to see. The data is limited, but from what we've been able to see, we think that's the case. Based on our previous estimates with the Western Regressive Model, we did a 10-year post-fire, and that model recommends you either use a 5-year or a 10-year storm event when you're calculating. We also look at a 25-year event just in case, but the model really isn't built for larger events. They're more predictive when it's a 5 or a 10-year event. So we did the 10-year event, and we modeled about 15 acre feet could come out of that canyon on a 10-year post-fire storm event. When we take a look at this event that occurred, I'm talking with Shane, the city cleaned up what we estimate to be about 11 acre feet of sediment. And we think that maybe as much as 15 acre feet came out of that canyon in this event, as opposed to a half an acre foot or so in 2003. So I had Danny, who does all of my calculations and all the assessments on the engineering side. I said, let's take a look at this footprint of this debris flow, and let's see what causes debris to flow and what causes it to stop. Debris flows, when they're channelized, the energy in those channels is pretty strong, and that's what allows water to pick debris up in the first place, and that's what eventually, maintaining that channelization, allows it to transport sediment. Once you get debris out of a channel and it starts to spread out, then the velocity of the flow drops and the energy drops, so it can't maintain that sediment load, and it starts to drop that sediment load. So the fencing in this event would have, we think, if every single fence had totally filled up 4 feet high, which the fabric only came up half that height, but if it had backed up and every bit of fencing had caught a full 4 feet of sediment behind it on that slope, the whole system might have been able to capture about 2.5 acre feet of sediment. Now that system probably wouldn't work that way, but if it did, if we were able to capture all the sediment that those fences could hold out of a 15 acre foot or 11, 12, 13, whatever actually wound up coming down, because the city only cleaned up the stuff mostly that was on the roads, in the public areas. They didn't necessarily come up here and clean up sediment in here. They were cleaning up all of this sediment here, and that was about 11 acre feet. So we think there's more. We don't have enough time between then and now to have calculated that, but we're going to try to get a better estimate. But there's no way that that fencing system would have stopped or been able to contain that much flow. But that fencing system is not designed to contain and retain a debris flow. They're designed to spread out channelized flow so that the flows can slow down and they can start to deposit and they can start to lose their sediment and lose their velocity. And the velocity is equivalent to the damage they can do, because if mud is very slowly moving and it impacts a building, it'll likely flow around it. But if sediment is moving fast enough, it'll go right through the building, maybe take the building down. These can be very, very destructive events. So the idea is to slow them down, reduce the volume of sediment, reduce the velocity. So the chain link fence system would have been pretty ineffective. it would have taken some sediment out, would have slowed the flow some. But with this amount of volume, it just wouldn't have been practical to assume that that would have been a mitigation. So when we took a look at what currently is there, what we noticed was at the mouth of this is the very end of the berm that was created during the mitigation in 2003. They built a berm, because there's a low spot right here. They built an earthen berm here prior to this debris flow, which you can see caught the debris, spreading the debris out, and you could see the water channels splitting up the water flow into a few different channels here. The debris was so much it overtopped that, but when it came down, all of a sudden you can see it spreading out. It hit some of the construction site, dropped down into a flat spot that had been graded, and the flat spots then allow that debris to spread out and the velocity to drop. And you can see that they had a waste pile here of soil, and it actually pushed that debris around that pile. There was a little gap between this pile and this pile, and the debris went through here. And you can see again, there's a couple of different channels of the water flow now, because it's spreading out and it's losing its channel. It came to this drop and was able to come down and drop down to this next flat spot where again it spread out and deposited a bunch of sediment. Then it came down towards Nevada Boulevard, where the city had installed a series of concrete barriers here, and those Jersey barriers impeded the flow significantly and pushed the majority of that flow down Nevada. Unfortunately, the volume, those Jersey barriers are only 3 feet tall, and unfortunately the volume was so much that they overtopped those barriers eventually. However, the velocity of the flow was diminished to the point where the impact to the church was mostly mud flooding. It didn't come in and knock a wall down or, damage the structure. Not that flooding is in structure, but I mean structurally the building's fine even though there's flood damage and mud flooding in there. So that was actually a pretty positive outcome. I think this system, it's not a design system, right? It's the topography. I think this topography had at least as good, if not a better, stilling effect on the debris flow than that native slope, which was sloping continuously right down the boulevard, would have had, because I think those fences would have been very quickly overtopped with debris, clogged up, the flow would have come over, and you would have had an even slope for that energy to continue. But the fact that those terraces were there and the debris was hitting and fanning out and losing velocity, I think was fortunate that we had that there. Next slide. So now I want to show a comparison. So Danny and I took a look. This is a 2004 photo, so it's a year after the debris flow. And we were looking at some of the photos, and what happened in this event is the debris came down this channel and hit this first fence. Now this first fence ended right here in 2003. This part of the fence was added after the debris flow. And what happened is you saw a picture of the sediment kind of building up behind this fence, and as it built up, it eventually escaped around the southern part of that fencing and came down to the second fence, where the end of that second fence was right about here. And so eventually that debris was able to get around the second fence, and the third fence ended here. So that debris basically hit this road and then kind of petered out right here. The main part of the flow overtopped this fence, came down, overtopped this fence, well not overtopped, but overtopped the filter fabric, went through the rest of the chain link and down. And we think it died somewhere in here. There was no record of any of it getting down to these 3 fences. Very small footprint. So, next slide. Then, here's a picture I wanted to show you of the debris that is coming off the first fence, down to the second fence, then around the second fence, past the third fence, but you can see how much debris is there. It's a couple of inches, it's spread out, it's mostly muddy, dirty water at this point, bringing some sand, some minor gravels. It's dying right here. So compared with the volume that came down to the church and down to Nevada, this just petered out pretty quickly. If we take the last slide. So what we did with this slide is to try to answer a few questions. First thing, we have the aerial photo that shows the footprint that we showed earlier of that debris field associated with the deposition of the sediment. And what Danny did, because he's younger than me, I'm going to go up the canyon and take photographs to look where that channel was scouring and picking up sediment, and where it was just transporting sediment and maybe depositing sediment, but not bulking up anymore or picking up any more sediment. And so the red areas are where we suspect there might have been some picking up of sediment because the slope was steep enough. There was some scouring, we could see evidence of that. But the majority of this channel was just a transportation corridor where the debris was traveling down, making levees and depositing at the side, but not picking up any extra sediment. Once it got over this first earthen berm here, the rest of this way, through this construction site down in Nevada and down, that was all a depositional environment. So there was some question, could the construction site have contributed to the debris flow volume? And our evidence suggests that no, in fact, that's an area where it was depositing based on the grading. It just didn't have the energy at that point to be bulking and picking up more sediment. I'm assuming when it's flowing around this stockpile, some minor amount of stuff could be getting into the debris flow, but it's insignificant compared with the volume coming out of the canyon. And our post-fire analysis indicated about 15 acre-feet could come out, which is about what we think did. So to summarize that, you can again see where the old 6 fences were. The first debris flow basically had a very small footprint and very little impact and no impact down here, as opposed to the acre-feet of sediment that made it much farther down. So that's pretty much all I have. That's the data. I have a lot more analytical stuff we're still working on, which we'll be putting in the report in the future. So I'll just give this back to the mayor.
Thank you. All right. At this point, we'll take questions. So ask away.
I want to make sure I understand clearly. Did the developer remove those fences you were talking about, and did they make other adjustments to the canal channel? Help me understand that a little bit clearer.
It's a great question.
What was done by the developer, and how did that hurt? What happened?
We'll turn this one to Gordon.
Thanks, Mayor. No, that's a great question. So the developer did remove the fencing, and once we saw the fire up there, we met with the developer and started putting in the berms and a debris basin. We ended up adding those Jersey barriers to replicate the catching power of those fences and what was there previously.
Did they do anything to the channel itself?
So if you look at the channel itself, let's go back a slide or two. So, so stop there, go back. So if you look, this is the biggest concern we had with these houses right here. That's what we wanted to protect. And so this channel was still had a potential to come too close to it, made us nervous. So we had them extend the berm for this out here about 300 feet and then curve over and put a debris basin that was supposed to catch. So if we'd have had this event, it would all been stopped here. Unfortunately, we had the event, it overtopped the berm and then leveled out. So if you go to the next slide. So if you can see what he was talking about, this ended up catching more debris than what it would have been caught by those fences. So we ended up having a system, not necessarily by design, but because of what was installed, it caught more debris than what would have been there if the fences had remained and this storm would have taken place.
I guess, do you feel it was weakened at all by what the developer did compared to what would have been if they hadn't done it?
No, we were better off with the fences gone and the contouring because from what Tim was talking about, this slope was continuous and this would have hit the church at a much greater rate of speed than what did hit it because the ground was terraced as opposed to a continuous slope. So instead of being a luge that just picked up speed going down, it stopped, start, and then the spreading out took place. So while it was better than what was there in 2003 with the fencing, it still was not enough to stop the church from getting flooded, but it did reduce some of the material that actually hit the church. Had that been there, so one of the things you can see is each one of these berms has pushed this flow further down and continued. If you go back to what is it? Yeah, this was coming down and would have hit the church on the backside and probably would have not had very little flow, would have gone out to Nevada and Slate Canyon. It would have all come through the church parking lot. So I think that was a real benefit.
Thanks, Gordon.
Sorry.
So what now? I mean, you've got an area clearly that has a several decades long series of issues, fires, mudslide. What now?
Another great question. I'll take it at this, and then Gordon, you can step as well. What now? The minute the fire began, I can tell you the conversation began of what's next and what if a rainstorm. There wasn't even more than 4 hours into the fire that Sunday evening where we weren't having the discussions of what next, how do we do this. We are aware of potential and possibilities. The one thing that is really tricky and honestly is Mother Nature. She's the boss.
Can't sue Mother Nature.
No, if you figure that out, we might be able to give our firefighters a break if we can control Mother Nature a little bit. But
now to prepare for that worst case scenario.
we can engineer and prepare to standards. I believe, and Gordon, just because I've been in the room a lot lately, engineering standards to prepare for a 25-year, which was stated by our national forest that at some point it hit the 10-year, and then at some capacities it was the equivalent of a 25-year. And nobody wants to hear that, right? When there's a mudslide coming. I get it. But it really was interesting to see that water coming down less than 30 minutes, a 0.8 of an inch. A lot of people don't understand how massive and how much that is. And then put it on top of a burn scar. That's not good. Gordon, do you want to add?
Yeah, and the mayor's exactly right. And just as Tim talked about, a year ago, 2 years ago, we've been working with them. Excuse me, I had a drink of water. How we were going to build a brand new, go back to the other slide. So go back, yeah, this one. So what our intent is to construct the channel continued on 1,200 feet and make a debris basin that would contain this storm that took place. Now, that is part of what the developer is required to do. Had this storm take place 2 months from now, that debris basin would have been in. The church would not have seen any of the debris. The houses wouldn't have been protected. And you'd have seen this bypass this whole area to a debris basin. So we have that in place. It's taken a number of years to design that. We have Tim doing a new evaluation just to verify having seen this actual data up there. So this will be built in the next, its construction starts the 15th of September, and over the next 2 months there were some delays due to utilities that need to be relocated, but now those have been resolved, and so we'll see that constructed. So if the storm could have come 2 months from now, it would have been a much better situation. So the infrastructure is going to be in place. And so as the mayor said, right after the fire, she was asking us about what are we going to do, how are we going to protect these homes. We immediately started doing some preliminaries work that would have handled the storm in 2003, thinking that was the highest probability, but we only had a 10-day window to get what would take 2 months to construct. So I don't know if that answered the question.
I think Gordon brought up a really valid point again, that our number one concern is the safety of our citizens. And those homes, there was 0 evacuations. We're really proud of that. And the properties no homes were hit by the mudslide and taken off the mountain, which we've seen in previous disasters around the state. It's interesting because it's like ours tripped, and then on the news there were like 4 or 5 more that tripped that were moving homes. And so we felt really grateful and blessed that not a single evacuation, the citizens were protected, and their private property of their homes were protected as well. Yes?
It doesn't matter who, but talk to you about how rare of an event this was. Like, again, you mentioned it was 0.8, 0.7 inches in 30 minutes, or of an inch in 30 minutes. Like, that doesn't happen. And again, you mentioned you would
Tim, would you like to?
I can.
Yeah, let me just introduce this. Maybe he ought to answer, but it's not necessarily that the 0.8 inches happened. It happened on top of a burn scar. Had it been on a normal piece of ground, so that rain event can take place. So anyway, the chance of having it on a burn scar, and all.
Yeah, this type of rain event was considered a 10-year event, right? So it's not ultimately very rare. They don't happen all the time, but they do happen frequently. And you can have, although it says a 10-year event, you can have 2 or 3 of those in close succession. That's a probability. It's not an actual measurement, right? So it's a statistical analysis of volume. The issue you've got is that drainage basin sees those kind of flood events as far as the amount of water all the time. But very rarely does any water even come out of that drainage, let alone any debris. The vegetation that's up there, and that's why the Forestry Service works so hard to keep their forest watersheds healthy and keep the vegetation in place, because the vegetation is what really mitigates the disaster of having all that soil move, right? After a fire, they go up and take a look at the condition of the soil. We're in a desert, so all our plants survive by being really pitchy and sappy and got a lot of wax and oil. And when they burn, they drop all that on the soil. So a water event that normally would just have that water infiltrate in, the roots of the plants would pick it up and take care of it. That's all gone. And on top of that, the soil has now been coated with a waxy substance that makes that hydrophobic surface so that all the water has a tendency to be pushed off rather than absorbed. So for the few years after a fire, those hazards are higher, even with smaller events. But that canyon can probably take much more than a 10-year event and not even have any water come out in a normal condition. But the post-fire kind of changes that. The other thing is you can have much larger than 10-year events. And if we had a 500-year storm event in that canyon, even without a fire, we might wind up with some debris and sediment coming out. The standard is to try to design to the post-fire 10-year condition for your conveyance and storage of sediment. But if we had a 500-year storm event happen after a fire, I don't think any of the infrastructure that we have would be sufficient, because it would just be too large of a volume. But the design standards, much like cities mitigate a 100-year flood event for firm maps, right? We look at a post-fire condition of about 10 years and hope that the 100-year storm or the 200-year storm doesn't come.
So Mayor, what's your message to residents who worry about another rainstorm and if the city is prepared?
I worry about another rainstorm too. I've never watched the weather so close in my life. But again, we're ready. We will be there. We will be there to make sure you're safe, and we'll do everything we can to take care of you and protect your properties and mitigate these storms. We've been putting in storm drains. Shane can speak to that. Why don't you speak to that, Shane? We have spent a lot of years focusing on our storm drain capacities and our new water information system that we've just recently opened. All these infrastructure items that are literally generational projects are for events similar to this. The previous infrastructure, and some that had no infrastructure, would never have even been able to handle any of this. We're getting there. So Shane, you speak to the more technical side. You're the engineer.
I can say immediately, we've worked with the developer. So the concern is this continuing to happen. So we have, and I know Gordon and I and others have met with the developer. It was, Gordon mentioned before, we had a big dam, check dam that was built before it actually come down. We've worked with the developer. Yeah, they had built up there. We actually worked with the developer, and he's, here we go. We can go back a little bit farther. Yeah, go, that's fine, that one. He's actually built, so we've cleaned the one out that was first put in there, up near the channel exit. And then we put another series of check dams and another real large one here. And they've also cleared some other areas to continue to capture more sediment and then also continue to push it further north so it won't hit the church.
Shane, why don't you speak to our end of game plan when it's built out the 1,200 feet and where we hope the debris should be driven?
So you can leave that here. So right now, and been working with the engineers, and Gordon has been working with the engineers. We've been meeting with them continuously. This is the end of the channel now. When we talk 1,200 feet, this channel is gonna continue to be built all along north, along here, up to about this area right here, which will capture, similar to this event, as Tim can to attest, that will end up capturing this event in this channel. And then what we'll do is continuation, a channel that will work where we'll develop a bigger debris basin, and then we'll catch any excess beyond that. So we are designing right now, as Tim said, to the industry standard. We'll be starting that in September 15th.
When will that be done? When will that extension be done?
We're looking about 2 months right now. So in about 2 months, we'll have that channel built, which will protect the area. And that way, so as the following years where we have rain events or potential for debris flow, that will be in place to protect.
So is it just sort of hope it doesn't rain like it did over those 2 months?
I can tell you in the city, because I work with stormwater, I hope every day that it doesn't rain. So we deal with this, anytime we get a large rain event where we look where rain is potential, our city is on alert, our staff, my staff is on alert for those events. So yeah, we are prepared for those events, but any events where they're really large, it is challenging for us to say, yeah, we're gonna be able to handle all of that. It's just Mother Nature sometimes is a lot bigger than we can build to.
All right, questions? Okay, then, seeing no further questions, we'll go ahead, and Gordon, do you wanna wrap it up?
Yeah, I can just sum up real quickly. So, you wanna bring up that QR code. So, from this QR code, you can get all the technical data. You can actually get the design of that 1,200 foot berm and all the details. Tim's reports are in there. We'll have an actual final report, like I said, in about 4 to 5 weeks. In the meantime, as Shane said, and the mayor, we are working with the developer. We put in a system that we believe would handle, that will handle the event that took place in 2003. If we get it, and ultimately in 2 months, we should have one that will handle the 25-year event. So we're anxiously going forward with that. And if you want to talk to anybody in one-on-one, you're free to have them. So.
Well, I just want to also announce that we are launching a new link on the Provo City.gov website called Fact Finder, and it's launching today. And it has multiple links and white papers, details, reports, pretty much nothing but facts for multiple issues that are out there in the social media world that are mistruths. So look for that. This will be one of those that'll be on our fact finder. We're excited about it. It is going to be really, I hope, used and effective to kind of quiet down the rumors. So fact finder at provocity.gov. All right, thank you everyone for coming out today. We appreciate your time.